Welcome to Inside Scoop Live, the podcast where indie authors get personal, sharing insights about their books, their writing journeys, and their passions. I'm your host, Sherry Hoyt, and I invite you to join me for engaging conversations with both debut indie authors and seasoned veterans. Whether you're looking for your next great read or a bit of inspiration, you've come to the right place. Let's get started. Hi, everyone. J. Matthew Neal joins the show today to talk about his latest book, Stella Scura, Dark Star Rising. It's a story about a teenage girl raised in the isolation of rural Alaska who discovers mysterious superhuman abilities and learns that true strength comes not from her powers, but from the choices she makes as an ordinary person. Before we get started, here's the inside scoop on the author. J. Matthew Neal is an endocrinologist and medical school assistant dean residing in Muncie, Indiana. He is the author of 5 problem-based endocrinology textbooks and began writing fiction in the mid-2000s. His first novel, Specific Gravity, was published in 2007. His other fiction works include its sequel, Ontario Laka's 2008, the young adult novel, Americum the Beautiful, 2010, and medical mysteries Amalgaman 2022 and Amalgaman Burt Crispy 2025. You can learn more about Matthew Neal and his work at jmneal.com. Well, hi, Matt. Welcome to Inside Scoop Live.
Thank you, Sherry. Nice to meet you, and I'm happy to be here.
I guess to start us off, what is Stella Scura, Dark Star Rising all about, and what was your inspiration behind the story?
This is actually a character that I developed in 1980, believe it or not, when I was in college. So I developed a lot of characters. Most of the characters in my novels are derived from characters I created, over 40 years ago. Dark Star, or in Italian, Stella Scura, is Paige Marshall. This segment is her journey through her 18th year. She's a teenage girl who discovers an array of extraordinary physical abilities, the origins of which are unknown to her. She was raised intentionally in rural Alaska, where her visibility would be limited by those who might exploit her. One thing is that most superhero tales are about the hero, and the alter ego or secret identity is just a plot device, but I always envisioned this character to go on and do greater things as Paige Marshall. And, at the end of this story, she abandons her powers and ends up going to college like a normal person. But she finally realizes that no one person, no matter how powerful, can save the world, and realizes that people will trust her more because of her choices not to use her powers for her own gain, and that she can achieve more as a person rather than a hero. Not everybody ends up being happy with that, but that's her choice.
Yeah. What a great twist on the superhero approach. I love that. Now, you mentioned Alaska, and the series is in a small town of Alaska, but it expands into a cosmic and political kind of epic story. How did you approach building a story that grows on such a massive scale?
So they ended up in Alaska because Paige's mother is a famous physicist, and they were on their way to Sweden on a jet for her to receive her Nobel Prize. And, renegade, lunatic basically shot down their plane with a nuclear missile. Because of her powers, she was able to, survive and shield her mother, but everyone else was killed. Her mother contacted her now dead husband's old friend, who became Jack Marshall, and they ended up going to Alaska, where they could raise her in relative obscurity because they knew people would be looking for her. So that's how we ended up there. But in reality, some people actually know that she survived, and leave her alone until she starts going out on her own.
Oh, wow. When you were talking about how they brought her up in obscurity, it kind of reminded me of how in the days of old, people would, hide the prince, the future king, because people killed future kings back in the day.
Yeah. And the one thing that happened in the blast, they survived a nuclear blast that Paige lost her sight. And that's an important part. Her not being able to see is important for her to learn humility and learn something difficult, because she doesn't have all these powers as a child, but they grow. And by age 18, she's pretty much fully formed.
Yeah. How did you, well, her character, her evolution from, misunderstood teen to Stella Scura is very powerful and very complex too. You mentioned the blindness being an important part of her journey. What aspects did you most want your readers to connect with?
That the most important thing, she, later is able to, have limited vision with the aid of a special visor that they create. An important part of the story is that she needs to depend on others. She can't just go out and, rule the world by herself. Nor does she want to, but she's always going to need help from others to achieve what she wants.
Yeah. Okay. Power and restraint defines a lot of Paige's story. What does power mean, and how does Paige's understanding of it change over time?
I mean, initially she realizes she, has immense power. She's kind of a handful to her mother and adopted father. Despite being blind, she gets into a lot of trouble. She drinks, she smokes, she likes guys. And one important thing about it being in Alaska is that that's close to an Air Force base where she meets an Air Force lieutenant that she falls in love with. I've received some comments, gee, it's kind of inappropriate for an Air Force lieutenant to be dating a high school senior, but it really is important to the story. But power, she, ends up doing some things and kind of becomes this celebrity overnight. But when she meets the president, she finally realizes what true power is when Wendy Mendoza, says, you know what, I'm not the least bit intimidated by you. So, realizes that true power is having fear of nothing, even though Paige is physically far more powerful. So power is not just what you can do physically, it's how you can get people around you to do things. And, the power of somebody, with 400 million people behind you is more powerful.
Yeah. And we kind of are witnessing that in the world today.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because I started writing this story a long time ago, and Wendy Mendoza has kind of evolved into a rather polarizing political figure, not unlike a polarizing figure we currently have. I
Mhm.
mean, if you look at what she's done, there's 55 states now. She made the moon a state, which is actually kind of illegal, but she did it anyway to capture the helium-3 on the far side, which is used for nuclear fusion, and just kind of does whatever she wants because of her political power. And that's not totally unlike some things going on today.
Right. So now tell me about Paige's dark reflection.
Actually, Mantissa is a misanthropic clone of her mother, not Paige. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Petra has immense mental powers, which she received during the nuclear blast. A radiation wave went through Paige and into her, and Petra has limited powers of altering perception and is pretty unstable. She became more unstable after that. The main villain, Raymond Argon, sees Stella Scura as more of just a novelty, and true power is getting people to believe and do anything they want. So Mantissa is kind of a reflection of her mother, but eventually they want to incorporate Paige's genome into her. Mantissa is completely malevolent and with no remorse, who wants to become fully sentient and destroy its creator.
Wow. With the development of AI and how it's evolving so quickly, things, robots, whatever you want to call them, becoming sentient doesn't seem so far off in the future anymore, you know?
Mantissa is actually, its true physical form is actually just a hideous, deformed being, which can assume the guise of anyone because of its ability to affect people's perception.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Now, Petra, Pastor Jack, President Wendy Mendoza, they all influence Paige in different ways. How do these relationships shape who she becomes?
Well, Petra Nuryev, and she adopted a Russian persona because initially Paige uses a Russian exosuit that was stolen by Petra and Paige's grandfather in the novel Ontario Lacus. Anyway, Petra was once one of the most intelligent theoretical physicists known, named Bonnie Mendoza. Paige was born, her birth name was Aurora Angelica Darkin Mendoza. So she was born into the Mendoza family, which was one of the most elite athletic and academic families, but then had to abandon that after the accident. Petra is a neurodivergent individual. The Bonnie Mendoza persona was a high-functioning person with autism who becomes, more unstable after the accident and basically teaches math at the high school and it is very eccentric and kind of predicts the end of the world because
Mm.
she and Wendy were old friends and she predicts, Wendy's going to go off the deep end and destroy everybody, which may end up happening. So, but Petra is very kind and cares about Paige, but is also somewhat harsh because she knows the power she contains and helps her learn to regulate that. Jack Marshall is not a real person. That's the name of her biological father's best friend who Petra, enlisted after the accident to come out there and live. And they ended up getting married. And he, interestingly, in the earlier novels, never really believed in God, but he becomes a pastor of all things and kind of his Paige's, voice of reason because her mom's kind of unstable. So, but Jack is kind of the voice of reason, the one who gets her out of jail whenever she's caught drinking or whatever. So,
Yeah, typical teen stuff, right? Yeah.
Wendy Gallinsworth is a complex character, and she and Bonnie Mendoza were friends back in San Diego, back in their teens. Wendy is her biological father's sister. Wendy married Bonnie Mendoza's brother. So that's how she got the name Mendoza. She's done a lot for humanity. She was Surgeon General. She was Governor of California. She's half British. So she was knighted by the Queen a while back and is kind of a larger than life personality. She knew of her niece's powers before the accident and vowed to protect her from anyone who would try to militarize her power. If for nothing else, she wanted to, direct that power herself. So they have widely differing political views. And at their first Oval Office meeting, Paige tells her that, you know what, I didn't vote for you. And she said, that's, that's okay. But she's quite a influential figure and kind of a protector. And in one scene, Paige almost is going to do something rather violent, and Wendy kind of talks her down from that. So Wendy's not a bad person. She's just been shaped by life events. Her family was blown up. She was
Mm.
almost assassinated. She's gone through a lot, and she's just kind of fanatical about making America the strongest. So,
Yeah. Okay. Wow, there's a lot going on. That makes me wonder, how did you keep all the story straight in your mind? Like, did you use an outline or do you have you couldn't have just written all this by the seat of your pants, right?
oh
How
no,
did all
no,
that work?
this took me several years to write. So I used to use outlining software. I don't really do that much anymore, but I mean, most of the characters were formed from the earlier novels.
So they're with you. You've got them kind of,
They're with me. Yeah, they
yeah.
just have evolved into different things.
Okay. Now, mentioning some of the prequel novels, tell us about the Science Squad. What's that all
Okay,
about?
the Science Squad was, Wendy always had a lot of things going on. This was something she created back in San Diego. She was a physician who took care of children with disabilities. She created a cheap cable TV show in San Diego with heroes, each of which had some either neurodivergent trait or a disability, and called them the Science Squad. And they're kind of a motley crew of people, and they kind of fell off the face of the earth. And they were mentioned in the books, but were never seen. And after the demise of the show, they were never really seen or heard from again. But Paige's cousin, Bella, who's married to kind of an industrialist type of guy, they run the energy company. They discovered a process for mining helium-3 from the moon for nuclear fusion. And that's an actual real thing. There's probably millions of times more energy than all the energy that's ever existed on Earth. So they're wealthy. Bella sets up the science squad in their complex, and because she wants some eccentric scientists who she can trust, she doesn't necessarily trust what's going on with the administration. So these people are there to help Paige find out who she is and discover more about her powers.
Okay. You mentioned the helium-3 and talked about superhero and politics. How did you blend all that speculative science, that superhero mythology, and the political drama together to keep the story cohesive?
Well, that's a challenge. It's a lot of different things to throw together. Why then
Yeah.
that's why I think this book is kind of special. But I needed something, these people needed to have money. They needed to have power. A president whose family basically has unlimited wealth can do a lot of things and take over other countries and pretty much do whatever the heck she wants. They developed a way to remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, but it's as her mother prophesized, someone needs to come along with different political views as things have become a little bit unbalanced.
Yeah. Listening to you, I can't help thinking of all the parallels to today's world.
Yeah, and that's purely coincidental. This thing was written long before any current events.
Yeah.
But what would happen if a president had all that power, and she does?
Yeah, right. Now, you also inject some humor alongside these serious, like ethical and political issues. What does that contrast serve in your story?
Well, all of my stories interject some type of humor. There has to be some type of humor, and Paige tries to get through life by being funny and such. So I think it's important to show her humanity. Paige speaks in rhymes, which is a neurologic trait, some neurodivergent things inherited from her mother.
Mm.
So.
Religion and science often collide throughout the story, and sometimes they harmonize, sometimes they don't. What drew you to explore that particular kind of tension?
So her mother, Petra, has always been a religious person. And you may say, well, why is a scientist a religious person? And Petra, formerly Bonnie Mendoza, always felt that, the world couldn't exist as it did without some, divine being holding it all together. It's just too complicated. Paige, however, like many teens, doubts religion, doubts that it's all, real, and just think it's very convenient to do that. So she's kind of the one non-believer, and it's never really said whether she ends up believing in God when it's all done, but she does realize that true power lies in not using your power for force. There are several different times where she uses logic and empathy to de-escalate a situation. There's kind of a humorous segment where Wendy says you can't just be out there doing stuff. If you're going to do this stuff, you're going to have to be a, sworn officer. So she's got to get some field training, and she talks some suicidal woman off of a ledge by just getting her to do it rather than just grabbing her by force. And another time where she's, rescuing a guy from a terrorist country, and she, refuses to kill people. On another side, she gets very upset about the guy that sent the missile that blew up her family and is basically going to kill him. And Wendy talks her down from that and said, whatever you are, you can't do this. So in the end, Paige determines that, my best destiny is not to use my powers, even though I could.
Yeah, yeah. Despite all the stakes, the story all seems to center on family. What does family ultimately come to mean for Paige?
Well, initially, her family is very small. This accident happened when she was 6. So her family was just her mom and her stepfather. She doesn't know of anything else because they hide things from her. So she eventually goes out on her own and decides to go out on a mission, and through various events discovers that she's actually part of America's first family. Her aunt is the president. Her cousin is one of the world's wealthiest women. Her younger cousin, Wendy's son, Will, is 11 and an athletic prodigy, just all these famous people that she didn't know about. And she's actually very resentful of Petra and Jack initially for keeping that from her, but Bella convinces her that they did that for her own good. So family is a very important thing to her.
Yeah, for sure. I could see where she'd be resentful. Now, the conclusion hints at Paige's future in politics. That leaves the door open for more. Did you always plan that kind of ending?
Pete had always, even in the initial chapters where she's in high school. She wants to be a politician. She ends up going to college, ends up going to Harvard Law School, ends up becoming a senator, the junior senator in Alaska. She wants to be president someday. She's, doing this the hard way. And people ask, well, why are you doing that when you're famous? People would give you anything you want. And she said that's not right. I didn't earn these powers and people won't respect me for them. And, taking things by force is not what I want to do. So she keeps that hidden. And, in the second segment of this, which will take place in the year 2043, then she'll have to come out of hiding again because some other things have happened because of some rather haphazard experiments by her aunt.
Never a dull moment, right?
No.
So, do you have more stories planned in this universe?
Yeah, there's a sequel planned. I don't know when I'm going to write it. This one took quite a while to write, so I imagine it's going to be a while, but it's going to involve Paige and her real father, the dark energy being who was evil that was killed by the cosmic beings, ends up coming back, and there's going to be some interesting things going on, and then she'll have to declare herself to the world that she really is Stella Scura, and then some people will be resentful that, why did you abandon us? And she said, I have the right to do that. So she's almost killed at the end of this book by stopping another nuclear missile.
Wow. So tell us about a new reader, a new fan. Where do they start if they want to get involved and learn more about this world? Is there an order to how these stories should be read? And I'm including your earlier prequels. Should those be read first?
I think if you read, you could read Stella Scura by itself. It's a lot more meaningful if you've read Specific Gravity and Ontario Lacus, which talk about the characters. Americium the Beautiful is probably less important, but it also shows, Bella Mendoza as a teenager, and that's also somewhat important. But I think if you wanted to get the best understanding of the characters, it would be to read all of them, just to see the depth of all the characters.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Okay. All right, good. Is there anything else you wanted to add today, Matt?
I don't think so. I will be working on a sequel to this as well as a standalone book with the character Orthoman. So that'll involve some characters from my Amalgam Man series. So be working on that. I'm also working on sort of a more of a serious romance book about a brilliant young healthcare executive who wants it all and, finds a really nice guy but rejects him because of a physical problem. But then a year later, she's, disfigured in an accident herself and has to come to terms with that and gets a second chance at true love. So that's a little bit different than anything I've ever written.
Oh, wow. It sounds like you're going to be busy for a while.
Well, yeah, I don't know when I'm going to have time to do it, but
it's in your
I'll
head,
work
so
on
it's got to come out.
Yeah.
Well, Matt, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing a little bit about yourself and your work. Great to have you.
Thank you, Sherry.
Thank you so much for joining me today for my interview with J. Matthew Neal, author of Stella Scura, Dark Star Rising. You can learn more about the author and his work at jmneal.com. And be sure to check out our other interviews at InsideScoopLive.com.